Welcome to a live reading of Armando Torres, Encounters with the Nagual. It will be uploaded later in after the first cut on Telegram and on YouTube. That's YouTube at Golgragon or Telegram Golden Phoenix Academy. Encounters with the Nagual by Armando Torres. No. Encounters with the Nagual, written by Armando Torres, read by Golgragon. Introduction. My name is Armando Torres. I have written this book in order to complete a task that was assigned to me years ago. In October of '84, I met Carlos Castaneda, a controversial anthropologist and writer on the subject of sorcery. At the time, I was still quite young. In my quest for answers, I had looked into various spiritual traditions, and I wanted to find a teacher. But from the very beginning, Carlos was very clear in this respect. I don't promise anything, he said. I am not a guru. Freedom is an individual choice, and each one of us must assume the responsibility of fighting for it. In one of the talks that I attended, he severely criticized the kind of human idolatry that induces us to follow others and to expect ready-made answers from them. He said that this attitude is a remnant of our herd mentality. Whoever sincerely wants to penetrate the teachings of sorcerer does not need guides. It is sufficient to have a genuine interest and guts of steel. He will, by himself, find everything he needs through an unbending intent. It was on these premises that our relationship evolved. Therefore, I want to state very clearly that I am not Carlos's apprentice in any formal sense of the word. All I did was talk with him from time to time. Yet, that was enough to convince me that the true path consists of our determination to be impeccable. The main motivation for publishing some of the experiences I had by his side is gratitude. Carlos was magnificent with everyone who had the good fortune of knowing him, since it is the nature of a Nagual to bestow gifts of power. To be near him was to receive an abundance of inspiration and a wealth of stories, advice, and teachings of all kinds. It would be selfish, then, for one who has There's a missing part there. In my dealings with him, and with other men of knowledge, I witnessed events that from a rational point of view could only be called extraordinary. For sorcerers, however, things like remote vision, knowledge of events before they happen, or journeying to parallel worlds are normal experiences in the execution of their tasks. As long as we are incapable of verifying them for ourselves, we will inevitably take them to be fantasies, or at best, metaphors. This is the nature of sorcerers' knowledge. Take it or leave it. You cannot reason it out. It is not possible to verify it intellectually. The only thing we can do with it is to put it into practice, exploring the extraordinary possibilities within our being. Armando Torres. Part 1. A Romance with Knowledge. The Sorcerer's Revolution. No. Part 1. A Romance with Knowledge. The Sorcerer's Revolution. We had gathered on the second floor of an elegant house in order to listen to a famous lecturer. We were a group of 12 people. I knew none of them, except the friend who had invited me. While we waited, we were chatting amicably among ourselves. Nearly 2 hours passed, and our guests had not yet arrived. People's faces began to show signs of fatigue. Some despaired and left. At a certain moment, I had the impulse to lean out of a window. I saw him arrive, and our eyes met. Unexpectedly, a strong wind came into the room, making papers fly everywhere. As Carlos walked in, some of the people were still struggling to close the windows. His appearance was different from what I had expected. He was short but solid, with grayish hair and a dark skin, He was short but solid, with grayish hair and a dark skin which had begun to furrow with wrinkles. He was dressed in an informal way, which made him look 10 years younger. His face, funny and full of life, radiated sympathy. He seemed very happy to be with us, and it was a true pleasure to be near him. He greeted each of us with a handshake and said we had to use our time well, because he was expected somewhere else later that night. Then he made himself comfortable in an armchair and asked, "What do you want to talk about?" But before we had time to answer him, he took the initiative and flooded us with stories. His conversation was direct and absorbing, sprinkled with jokes that he finished off with expressive gestures. During this talk, he referred to Nagualism as a body of practices and ideas, talked about its historical development, and maintained that modern man has been granted an incredible opportunity through the revelations of the sorcerers. Later, he spoke of a complex maneuver of awareness to which seers devote themselves, the movement of the assemblage point. This topic was quite new to me, so I limited myself to listen and take notes. Fortunately, Carlos had a habit of repeating the main ideas, and this made it easy for me to follow him. Towards the end, he agreed to answer some questions. One of the people present wanted to know what the sorcerer's view on war was. Carlos looked annoyed. "What do you want me to say?" he asked. "That they are pacifists? Well, they are not. Our destiny as ordinary men doesn't concern them at all. You should understand this once and for all. A warrior is made for combat. When he is at war, he is comfortable." Judging from his reaction, it seemed that the question had touched on a sensitive spot. He took his time, explaining that Unlike the petty wars which we as humans constantly involve ourselves in because of social, religious, or economic reasons, the war of sorcerers is not directed against other people, but against their own weaknesses. By the same token, their peace is not the submissive condition to which modern man has been reduced. Rather, it is an imperturbable state of internal silence and discipline. Passivity, he said, is a violation of our nature, because in essence, we are all formidable combatants. Every human being is, by right, a soldier who has achieved his place in this world in a battle of life and death. Look at it this way. At least once, as sperms, each one of us fought a battle for life, a unique struggle against millions of other competitors. And we won. And now the battle continues, since we are trapped by the forces of this world. One part of us is fighting to disintegrate and die, while another tries to maintain life and awareness at any cost. There is no peace. A warrior realizes this and uses it to his advantage. His goal continues to be that which inspired the spark of life that created him, access to a new level of awareness. He continued by saying that as we become socialized, human beings are tamed, just like an animal is domesticated, by the power of stimuli and punishment. We have been trained to live and die meekly, following unnatural codes of behavior which soften us and make us lose that initial impulse until our spirit is hardly noticeable. We are born as a result of a fight. By denying our basic tendencies, the society we live in eradicates the warring heritage that transform us into magical beings. He added that the only available way to change is to accept ourselves just as we are and work from there. The warrior knows that he lives in a predatory universe. He can never let his guard down. Whenever he looks, he sees an incessant fight, and he knows that it deserves his respect because it is a fight to the death. Don Matus was always moving, coming or going, supporting this or rejecting that, provoking tensions or discharging them in a burst, shouting his intent or remaining silent, doing something. He was alive, and his life reflected the ebb and flow of the universe. He told me that from the moment when the explosion which gave us origin occurred until the moment of our death, we live within a flow. These two episodes are unique because they prepare us for the encounter of what lies further ahead and what aligns us with that flow, an incessant battle which only a warrior will attempt. Because of that, he lives in profound harmony with everything. For a warrior, to be harmonious is to flow, not to stop in the middle of the current and try to make space of artificial and impossible peace. He knows that he can only give the very best of himself under conditions of maximum tensions. For that reason, he seeks out his opponent the way a fighting rooster does, with avidity, with delight, knowing that the next step is decisive. His opponent is not his fellow man, but his own attachments and weaknesses, and his grand challenge is to compress the layers of his energy until they won't expand when his life ceases, so that his awareness does not die. Ask yourselves these questions. What am I doing with my life? Does it have a purpose? Is it tight enough? A warrior accepts his destiny, whatever it may be. However, he fights to change things, and he makes something exquisite of his passage on earth. He tempers his will in such a way that nothing can deviate him from his purpose. Another of the people present raised his hand and asked how sorcerers are able to reconcile the principle of the warrior's way with their duties to society. He answered, "Sorcerers are free. They don't accept social obligation. The responsibility is to oneself, not to others. Do you know why you were given the power of perception? Have you discovered what purpose your life serves? Will you cancel your animal destiny?" Those are sorcerers' questions, the only ones that can seriously change anything. If you are interested in others, then answer that. A warrior knows that what gives sense to his life is the challenge of death, and death is a personal matter. It is a challenge for each one of us, and one which only sincere warriors accept. Seen from this point of view, the worries of ordinary people are just expressions of their egomania. Carlos insisted that we must not lose track of the fact that the commitment of a warrior is to what he called pure understanding, a state of being that arises from internal silence, and not to the transient attachments of the modality of the era in which he happens to live. He maintained that our social concerns are a description which has been implanted in us. It does not stem from a natural development of our consciousness. Rather, it is a product of the collective mind, of emotional disarray, feelings of fear and guilt, of a desire to lead others or be led. Modern man does not fight his own battles. Instead, he enters into extraneous wars that have nothing to do with the spirit. Naturally, a sorcerer is not moved by this. My teacher used to say that he didn't honor agreements made in his absence. I was not present when they decreed that I had to be an imbecile. He was born into particularly difficult circumstances, but he had the courage to become something more than just a human reaction to those circumstances. He affirmed that humanity's situation in general is horrendous, and to put emphasis on any particular group is just a covert form of racism. He used to repeat that in this world, there are only two kinds of people: those who have energy and those who don't. He lived in a permanent fight against the blindness of his fellow man, yet he remained impeccable. He did not interfere with anybody. When I tried to explain my concern for people to him, he would point at my incipient double chin and tell me, "Don't deceive yourself, Carlitos. If the human condition seriously interested you, you would not treat yourself like a pig." He taught me that to feel pity for others is inappropriate for a warrior, because pity for others always stems from concern for the self. He taught me that to feel pity for others is inappropriate for a warrior, because pity for others always stems from concern for the self. He used to ask me, pointing at people we met on our way, "Perhaps you believe yourself better than them." He helped me to understand that the solidarity of sorcerers towards the people around them comes from a supreme command, not from human sentiment. Mercilessly stalking my emotional reactions, he led me by the hand to the source of my preoccupations, and I was able to realize that my concern for people was a fraud. I was trying to escape from myself by transferring my problems to others. He showed me how compassion, in the sense we use the word, is a mental illness, a psychosis that will just make us more and more powerfully entangled in our ego. It was obvious that remembering Don Matus had moved Carlos. I could see how a wave of affection overwhelmed him. One of the people present raised his hand and commented that, in contrast to what Carlos was saying, compassion towards one's neighbor is the essential ideas. One of the people present raised his hand and commented that, in contrast to what Carlos was saying, compassion towards one's neighbor is the essential idea of all religions. He made a gesture of waving away a fly. Forget all that. Notions based on pity are a fraud. By the power of telling ourselves the same idea over and over, we have substituted a genuine interest in man's spirit with cheap sentimentality. We have become professionals at compassion. And so what? Has it changed anything? When you feel the collective mind putting its pressure on you, trying to convince you to concentrate on the appearances of the world, repeat this crushing truth to yourself. I am going to die. I am not important. Nobody is. Knowing that is the only thing that counts. As an example of misplaced effort, he described the situation of a donkey caught in the mire. The more it moves, the more difficult things become. Its only way out is to act with coldness, try to relieve itself of the load on its back, and concentrate on the immediacy of its problem. The same thing happens to us. We are beings who are going to die. We were programmed to live like beasts, carrying loads of customs and other people's beliefs until the very end. But we can change all that. The freedom which the warrior's way offers us is within the reach of your hand. Take advantage of it. He told us how, while he was an apprentice, he had a problem. He was addicted to cigarettes. He had tried to quit several times, but without success. One day, Don Matus told me that we were going to collect plants in a desert area and that the trip would last several days. He told me, "You had better bring a whole carton of cigarettes, but make sure you wrap them very well because the desert is full of animals that might steal them." I thanked him for his consideration and carefully did as he had suggested. But the following day, when I woke up in the middle of the chaparral, I discovered that the package had disappeared. I despaired. I knew that without cigarettes, I would soon begin to feel bad. Don Matus blamed the loss on a coyote and helped me to look for it. After hours of anguish, he finally found the tracks of the animal, which we followed for the rest of the day, going farther and farther into the mountains. When night arrived, he admitted to me that we were completely lost. Without cigarettes, and without knowing where I was, I felt miserable. To console me, he assured me that there had to be a town nearby. It was just a matter of walking a little farther and we would arrive someplace and be safe. But we spent the whole next day looking for a road, and then the next, and then another. We spent almost 2 weeks like this. A moment arrived when, almost dead from exhaustion, I let myself down in the sand and prepared to die. When he saw me in that state, he tried to cheer me up and make me keep going and asking, "Aren't you interested in smoking anymore?" I looked at him with rage, berated him for his incredible irresponsibility, and turning a deaf ear to him, I said that all I wanted was to die. "Very well," he replied with indifference. "Then we can go back now." We had been a few meters from the highway the whole time. The anecdote made the room explode with laughter. When we finally calmed down, Carlos remarked, "The tragedy of today's man is not his social condition, but the lack of will to change himself. It is very easy to design collective revolutions, but to genuinely change, to put an end to self-pity, to erase the ego, to abandon our habits and whims. That is something else entirely. Sorcerers say that true rebellion and humanity's only way out as a species is to stage a revolution against their own stupidity. As you can understand, this is solitary work. The goal of sorcerers is the sorcerer's revolution, the unrestricted unfolding of all our perceptual possibilities. I have never known a greater revolutionary than my teacher. He didn't just suggest changing tortillas for bread. Oh no, he went straight to the core of the matter. He proposed a deadly somersault of thought to the unknown, the release from all ties, and he demonstrated that it is possible. He suggested that I fill my life with decisions of power, with strategies which will bring me to awareness. He taught me that the order of the world doesn't have to be as we have been told, that I can toss it aside anytime. I am not obliged to uphold an image before others or live in an inventory that doesn't suit me. My battlefield is the path of the warrior. When the meeting was over, all his listeners gathered to exchange a few words with him and say their farewells. When it was my turn, Carlos looked me up and down. Then he suggested me to tell him my name and why I was there. I told him my name and explained that a friend, knowing my interest for the subject, had told me about this opportunity. His only comment was, "I want to talk to you in private." I was a little confused by his words, but waited until the end of his round of greetings and followed him to a corner of the room. There, he invited me to have breakfast at his hotel the following day. I assured him that it would be my pleasure. He gave me the address and told me, "We'll meet tomorrow at 9 o'clock. He added that I should not tell anybody about our about our encounter and that I should be punctual. 5-minute break. Self-importance. I arrived in the hotel Self-importance. I arrived in the hotel lobby at the agreed time and had barely waited 1 minute when I saw him coming down from the room upstairs. We greeted each other and went into a restaurant where a delicious breakfast was served. At one point, I wanted to ask him something, but he made a gesture that I should shut my mouth. We ate in silence. When we were done, we left to walk down to Doncheles Street towards the Jocalo. While we browsed through the second-hand bookstores, he told me that he generally did not speak privately with people, but that in my case, while we browsed through the second-hand bookstore, he told me that he generally did not speak privately with people, but that my case was different because he had received an indication about it. I didn't know what he was talking about and preferred to stay quiet, since any comment I might make would only show my ignorance. He added that I shouldn't confuse his deference with a personal concern. I have said many times that my energetic condition prevents me from taking pupils. People are disappointed with me because of that, but there is no way. We talked about all kinds of things. He asked me many questions about my life, asked for my phone number, and told me that he was giving a talk at a friend's house the following night. I was invited to attend, but our relationship should remain secret. I replied that I would love to be there, and he gave me the address and the schedule. In one of the bookstores we visited, we came across a copy of one of his books called A Separate Reality. It was on the fiction shelf, which annoyed him a lot. He commented that people are so wrapped up in their everyday existence that they cannot even conceive of the mystery that surrounds us. When we encounter something unknown, we automatically classify it in a comfortable category, and then we forget it. I noticed that he thumbed through the books with great interest and that he would sometimes fondly and respectfully brush his hand over them. He said that they were more than just books. They were storage rooms of knowledge, and that one should surrender to knowledge, no matter in what form it was presented. He added that the information we need in order to increase our awareness hides in places we rarely think of. And if we were not so rigid, everything in our surroundings would tell us incredible secrets. All we need to do is open ourselves to knowledge, and it will come rushing to us like an avalanche. While studying a table of books that were so cheap they were almost free, he was struck by how cheap used books were compared to new ones. In his opinion, it proved that people are not really looking for information. What they look for is achieving the status of a buyer. I asked him what kind of reading he preferred, and he answered that he would like to know everything. However, today he was looking for a certain book of poetry, a particular old edition which had never been printed again. He asked me to help him find it. For a long time we leafed through the heaps of books. At the end, he went out with a package of them, but not the one he was looking for. With a guilty smile, he admitted, "This always happens to me." Near noon, we sat down to rest on a bench in a square where various printers were offering their services. I took the opportunity to confess that his statement of the previous night had left me perplexed, and asked him to explain in more detail what the War of the Sorcerers was about. He explained in a very kind way that it was natural that the topic should affect me, since, like all human beings, I had been taught from birth to perceive the world in which He explained in a very kind way that it was natural that the topic should affect me, since, like all humans, I had been taught from birth to perceive the world in much the same way as a flock of sheep. He told me stories of his cohorts, and how after many years of tenaciously fighting their weaknesses, they had finally overcome this collective coercion. He advised me to be patient, and in due course, things would become clear to me. After a while of relaxed conversation, he shook my hand in what was clearly a gesture of farewell. I could not contain my curiosity and asked him what he had meant when he said he had had an indication about my person. Instead of responding, he looked attentively at a point above my left shoulder. Immediately my ear became hot and began to hum. After a while he told me that he didn't know the answer himself, because he had not been able to read the nature of the sign, but it had been something so clear that he was obliged to pay attention. He added, "I cannot guide you, but I can put you in front of an abyss which will test all your abilities. It depends on you, whether you hurl yourself off to fly or run to hide in the security of your routines." His words made me even more curious. I asked him which abyss he was talking about. He told me it was my own dream. The answer shocked me. Somehow Carlos had noticed my internal dilemma. It was 6:45 when I arrived at a nice house. It was 6:45 when I arrived at a nice house near Coyoacan. It was 6:45 when I arrived at a nice house near Coyoacan. A pleasant girl who seemed to be the owner of the house received me. I explained that I had been invited to the talk with Carlos. That Carlos was going to give, and she let me enter. We introduced ourselves. She told me her name was Marta. There were 8 people in the room. Then another 2 guests arrived, and after them Carlos appeared. As usual, he greeted us effusively. This time, he was dressed in a very formal manner, with a tie and vest, and he was carrying a briefcase which gave him an intellectual look. He began to talk about many topics, and almost unnoticeably, he introduced the main subject of his talk: how to erase self-importance. As a preamble, he stated that the significant role we grant ourselves in everything we do, say, or think constitutes a kind of cognitive dissonance which clouds our senses and prevents us from seeing things clearly and objectively. We are like atrophied birds. We were born with everything necessary to fly. However, we are permanently forced to fly in tight circles around our own self. Sorry. We are like atrophied birds. We were born with everything necessary to fly. However, we are permanently forced to fly in tight circles around our own self. The chain that ties us down is self-importance. The path which transforms an ordinary human being into a warrior is very arduous. Our sensation of being at the center of everything, and the need to always have the last word, is forever getting in the way. We feel important, and when one is important, any intent to change is a slow, complicated, and painful process. That feeling isolates us. If not for that feeling, we would all flow in the sea of awareness, and we would know that the self doesn't exist for its own sake. Its destiny is to feed the ego. The sense of importance grows in a child while he is perfecting his social comprehension. We have been trained to construct a world of agreements that we can refer to in order to communicate with each other. But this gift included an annoying attachment: our idea of me. The self is a mental construction. It came from outside, and it's time for us to get rid of it. Carlos said that all the mistakes that occur when we communicate are living proof that the agreement we have received is completely artificial. After experimenting for millennia with situations that alter our way of perceiving the world, the sorcerers from ancient Mexico discovered a portentous fact: we are not forced to live in a single reality, because the universe is constructed according to very fluid principles. After experimenting for millennia with situations that alter our ways of perceiving the world, the sorcerers from ancient Mexico discovered a portentous fact: we are not forced to live in a single reality, because the universe is constructed according to very fluid principles which can accommodate almost infinite forms, producing countless ranges of perception. Starting from this verification, they deduce that what human beings actually receive from outside is the ability to fix our attention in one of those ranges in order to explore and recognize it. We mold ourselves to it and learn how to perceive it as something unique. This is how the idea that we live in an exclusive world arose, and the feeling of being an individual self was generated in consequence. There is no doubt that the description we have received is a value. There is no doubt that the description we have received is a valuable possession, similar to the rigid stake that is tied to a tender sapling to strengthen and guide it. It allows us to grow up as normal people within a society that is molded to that rigidity. To achieve it, we had to learn how to skim. That is, how to make selective readings from the enormous volume of data that arrives to our senses. But once those readings are converted into reality, the rigidity of our attention works as an anchor, because it prevents us from being aware of our incredible possibilities. Don Matus claimed that what limits human perception is timidity. To be able to manage the world which surrounds us, we have had to give up our perceptual gift. That is, the possibility of witnessing everything. We sacrifice the flight of awareness in exchange for the security of the known. We can live strong, audacious, healthy lives. We can be impeccable warriors, but we don't dare. Our heritage is a stable house where we can live, but we have transformed it into a fort for the defense of the self, or rather, into a jail, where we condemned our energy to weaken in lifelong imprisonment. Our best years, feelings, and forces are wasted in forever repairing and bolstering that house, because we have wound up identifying ourselves with it. In the process of becoming a social being, a growing child acquires a false conviction of his own importance, and what was a healthy feeling of self-preservation in the beginning ends up transformed into a selfish In the process of becoming a social being, a growing child acquires a false conviction of his own importance, and what was a healthy feeling of self-preservation in the beginning ends up transformed into a selfish clamor for attention. Of all the gifts we have received, self-importance is the cruelest. It converts a magical, vivid creature into a poor, arrogant, graceless devil. Pointing at his feet, he said that feeling important forces us to do absurd things. Look at me. Once I bought a pair of very fine shoes, which weighed almost a kilo each. I wasted $500 for the privilege of dragging these big shoes around. Because of our self-importance, we are stuffed to the point of bitterness, envy, and frustration. We allow ourselves to be guided by feelings of complacency, and we escape from the task of knowing ourselves with pretexts like, I can't be bothered, or how tiring. Behind all that, there is an anxiety which we try to silence with an internal dialogue increasingly more dense and less natural. At this point of his talk, Carlos took a pause in order to respond to some questions. He took the opportunity to tell us several stories illustrating the way self-importance deforms human beings, transforming them into rigid shells. Confronted with them, a warrior doesn't know whether to laugh or to cry. After many years of studying with Don Matus, I became so frightened at his practices that I went away for a while. I could not accept what he and my benefactor were doing to me. It seemed inhumane, unnecessary. I yearned for sweeter treatment. I took the opportunity to visit various spiritual teachers from all over the world, hoping to find some knowledge in their doctrines that would justify my desertion. Once I met a Californian guru who considered himself the real McCoy. He accepted me as his pupil and gave me the task of begging for charity alms in a public square. Thinking this was a new experience for me and probably would teach me an important lesson, I mustered up my courage and did what he requested. When I returned to him, I said, "Now, you do it." He became angry with me and expelled me from the class. On another trip, I went to see a well-known Hindu teacher. I went to his house early in the morning and stood in line with others. However, this gentleman kept us waiting for hours. When he appeared at the top of the stairway, he had a condescending air, as if granting us a great favor by admitting us. He began to descend the steps in a very dignifying manner, but his feet got entangled in his ample tunic, and he fell to the floor and cracked his head. He died there, right in front of us. On another occasion, Carlos told us that the demon of self-importance does not only affect those who believe themselves to be masters. It is a general problem. One of the strongest ramparts of self-importance is the concern with one's personal appearance. That was always a sore spot for me. Don Matus used to stoke the fire of my resentment by making fun of my stature. He used to tell me, "The shorter you are, the more egomaniac. You are small and ugly as a bedbug. Your only option is to be famous, because otherwise you don't exist." He claimed that the mere sight of me made him want to vomit, for which he was infinitely grateful to me. I was offended by his comments, since I was convinced that he exaggerated my defects. But one day I came into a store in Los Angeles and I realized that he was right. I heard someone beside me saying "short," and I felt so irritated without stopping to think. I turned around and punched him furiously in the face. Afterwards, I realized that the man had not made the comment about me at all. He had just been short of money. One piece of advice Don Matus gave us was that during our training as warriors, we should abstain from using what he called tools for the perpetuation of the self. This category included such objects as mirrors, the exhibition of academic titles, and albums of pictures with our personal history. The sorcerers in his group took this advice literally, but we, the apprentices, didn't care. However, for some reason, I interpreted his command in an extreme way, and from then on, I did not even allow anyone to take pictures of me. Once during a lecture, I explained that pictures are a perpetuation of self-concern, and that the purpose behind my reluctance was to maintain a measure of doubt about my person. Later, I found out that a certain lady among the public, who believed herself to be a spiritual guide, had commented that if she had had the face of a Mexican waiter, she wouldn't allow herself to be photographed either. While observing the quirks of self-importance, and the homogeneous way contaminates absolutely everybody, the seers have divided human beings into three categories: which Don Matus gave the most ridiculous names he could think of. The urines, the farts, and the vomits. We all fall into one of them. The urines are characterized by their servility. They are toady, sticky, and cloying. They are the people who always want to do you a favor. They take care of you, they hold you back, they pamper you, they have so much compassion. In that way, they hide the underlying reality. They are incapable of taking an initiative and can never do anything by themselves. They need another person's command to feel that they are doing something. And unfortunately for them, they assume that others are as kind as they are. And because of that, they are always hurt, disappointed, and tearful. The farts, on the other hand, are the opposite. Irritating, mean, and self-sufficient, they constantly impose themselves and interfere. Once they get a hold of you, they won't leave you alone. They are the most unpleasant people you'll ever meet. If you are calm, the fart will arrive and wind you up and pull you in and use you as much as possible. They have a natural gift as teachers and humanities leaders. They are the kind who will kill to stay in power. The vomits are in between those two categories. As neutrals, they are neither imposing nor will they be led. They are show-offs, ostentatious, and exhibitionistic. They give you the impression that they are something great, but in actual fact, they are nothing. It's all boast. They are caricatures of people who believe too much in themselves, but if you don't pay any attention to them, they are undone by their insignificance. Somebody in the audience asked him if belonging to one of those categories is an obligatory characteristic, that is to say, an innate condition of our luminosity. He answered, "Nobody is born like this. We make ourselves this way. We get into one or the other of those categories because of some tiny incident that marked us in childhood, whether it is pressure from our parents or other imponderable factors. It starts there, and as we grow up, we become so involved in the defense of the self that at some point we can no longer remember the day we stopped being authentic, and we became actors instead. When an apprentice enters the world of sorcerers, his basic personality is already formed, and nothing can cancel it out. The only option left to him is to laugh at it. But although it is not our congenital condition, sorcerers can detect what type of importance we grant ourselves through their seeing. Because the molding of our nature over the years produces permanent deformities in the energetic field that surrounds us. Carlos went on to explain that self-importance feeds on the same kind of energy that lets us dream. Therefore, to lose it is the basic condition of Nagualism, because it liberates an energy surplus for our use, and also because, without that precaution, the warrior's path could turn us into aberrations. This is what happened to many apprentices. They began well, saving their energy and developing their potential. But they didn't realize that as they gained power, they were also nurturing a parasite within themselves. If we are going to give in to the pressure of the ego, it is preferable that we do it as ordinary men, because a sorcerer who considers himself important is the saddest thing there is. Keep in mind that self-importance is treacherous. It can be disguised behind a facade of almost impeccable humility, because it is not in a hurry. After an entire life of practicing, it only takes a minimum of It only takes a minimum of negligence, a tiny mistake, and there it is again, like a virus that was incubated in silence, or like those frogs that wait for years under the sand of the desert, and with the first raindrops wake up from their lethargy and reproduce. Considering its nature, it is a benefactor's duty to attack the apprentice's self-importance until it explodes. He cannot feel pity. A warrior must learn to be humble in preparation for the arduous path ahead, or he won't have the smallest chance facing the darts of the unknown. Don Matus whipped his pupils to the point of cruelty. He recommended a 24-hour vigil to control the octopus of the self. Of course, we paid no attention to him, except for Eligio, the most advanced of the apprentices. The rest of us surrendered in the most shameful way to our propensities. In the case of La Gorda, it was fatal. He told us the story of Maria Elena, an advanced pupil of Don Matus who had developed great power as a warrior, but didn't know how to control the bad habits of her human stage. She thought that she had it all under control, but that was not the case. A very selfish concern, a personal attachment, remained in her. She expected things from the group of warriors, and that finished her. La Gorda felt offended with me, because she considered me unable to lead the apprentices to freedom, and she never accepted me as the new Nagual. Once Don Matus's directive force disappeared, she began to reproach me for my inadequacy, or rather my energetic anomaly, without keeping in mind that that too was a command of the spirit. Soon after, she allied herself with the Genados and the sisters and began to behave as if she were the leader of the party. But what exasperated her most of all was the public success of my books. One day, in an outburst of self-sufficiency, she gathered us all together, stood in front of us, and screamed, "Bunch of suckers, I'm leaving." She knew the exercise of the fire from within, by means of which she could move the assemblage point to the world of the Nagual and meet up with Don Matus and Don Genaro. But that afternoon she was very agitated. Some of the apprentices tried to calm her, and that infuriated her even more. I could not do anything. The situation inhibited my power. After a brutal effort, anything but impeccable, she had a stroke and fell down dead. What killed her was her egomania. As a morale of this strange story, Carlos added that a warrior never allows himself to reach the point of madness, because to die from an ego attack is the stupidest way to die. Self-importance is deadly. It stops the free flow of the energy, and that is fatal. It is responsible for our ends as individuals, and one day it will finish us as a species. When a warrior learns how to toss it aside, his spirit unfolds, jubilant, like a wild animal liberated from its cage and set free. Self-importance can be fought in various ways, but first of all, it is necessary to know that it is there. If you have a defect and you recognize it, half the work is done already. So above all, realize it. Take a board and write on it, "Self-importance kills," and hang it in the most visible spot in the house. Read that sentence every day. Try to remember it while you work. Meditate about it. Maybe the moment in which its meaning penetrates your interior will arrive, and you decide to do something. To realize it is, by and of itself, a great help, because the fight against the self generates its own impetus. Ordinarily, self-importance feeds on our feelings, ranging from the desire to get along with people and be accepted by others, to arrogance and sarcasm. But its favorite area of action is pity, for oneself and for those who surround us. In order to stalk it, above all, we have to deconstruct our emotions into their smallest particles and detect the sources that nurture them. Feelings rarely present themselves in a pure form. They disguise themselves. To hunt them down like rabbits, we have to proceed very delicately and strategically, because they are quick and we cannot reason with them. We begin with the most obvious thing, like, how seriously do I take myself? How attached am I? To what do I dedicate my time? These are things that we can begin to change, accumulating enough energy to liberate a little bit of attention that in turn will allow us to go deeper into the exercise. For example, instead of spending hours watching television, going shopping, or talking to our friends about stupid stuff, we could dedicate a small part of that time to do physical exercises, to recapitulate our history, or go alone to a park, take our shoes off, and walk barefoot in the grass. It seems simple, but with those practices, our sensorial panorama changes. We recover something that was always there, which we had given up for lost. Well, it looks like I have to stop here. So, thanks for watching, everyone. And I'll be continuing this very soon. In fact, I'll be doing this daily now. So, thank you.